Dopamine. Dopamine is it's a chemical that's been talked about a lot recently. And the truth is that a lot of people don't really understand it, even though it's a very popular subject. And the reason for that is a lot of people just really oversimplify dopamine's role and importance in your mental and physical health. Now, dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, as a lot of people think. It can cause feelings of pleasure, but what its main purpose is the chemical for motivation and drive. Now, when your body has a certain amount of dopamine in its system, this triggers feelings of well-being and just like overall mood and happiness, right? When you get a desire to do something, when you're, say, hungry, your dopamine is going to drop ever so slightly below this baseline level of dopamine that your body is naturally having. When this dip occurs, then you feel like, okay, well, I want to go eat something, right? And so you're thinking about food, and you're thinking about formulating a plan of how you can get that food, because your mind wants to have the dopamine back up to baseline, if not a little bit higher, right? And so you're going to feel motivation to go get food, whether it be to go to the fridge and get some food out of there, or make it, whether it be to go to a restaurant or a deli or whatever, right? When you get this food, your dopamine level is going to rise back up and spike above baseline, and then a short time after, it's going to go back to your baseline level until eventually you feel hunger again, or whatever urge or desire that you have to go do something. And so that is going to trigger your brain to crave doing something. Triggers your brain to produce motivation, because your brain wants to return to that baseline level of dopamine. So it creates a motivation, a drive, a desire to go get it. But what does this mean for pleasurable activities? Activities like scrolling on YouTube and watching videos and content and all sorts of things, right? Eating junk food. What do these pleasurable things impact on dopamine? Because they feel good, right? And so when you do something that feels good, what actually happens is, say you eat chocolate, right? You have a little dip in dopamine, so you can start craving chocolate, right? So you eat chocolate and your dopamine spikes sky high because it's chocolate, right? It tastes amazing, right? But shortly after, once that taste goes away and you swallow the chocolate or whatever, the dopamine is going to very, very quickly shoot back down, not just to baseline, but a little bit below baseline, because that feeling is over, but your brain and body still want more, right? Because you're not getting back to baseline, you're getting a little bit below. So what happens? Well, you crave chocolate more, and so you eat another piece, another piece, another piece, and you're binge eating, right? And so by binge eating sweets or candy or anything, your dopamine is actually, so when you get this second bite of chocolate, right, dopamine doesn't actually spike up back to where it originally was, like that first spike. It doesn't spike back up to the same level as the first spike. It's actually a little bit shorter than the first spike, and it goes back down, back down below baseline. In fact, it's even a little bit lower than the original drop in baseline. And so the cycle continues to dopamine level is incredibly low. And then you get feelings of guilt and shame, and you start to think to yourself, like, okay, I just ate like 2,000 calories worth of chocolate. What am I doing? Believe me, I've been there. So think about what's actually happening here, right? From this example, doing pleasurable activities is only fun for literally less than a second. You get that massive spike in dopamine, then it's back down below where you started. You're actually making your dopamine worse. Now, it's not saying to never, ever eat chocolate, right? I love chocolate, but understand that there is a necessary and incredibly, incredibly important balance that needs to be made with this dopamine stuff. Because when your dopamine is that low and you those feelings of shame arise, your quality of life is not great. Obviously, it's not. And the same can be said for drugs. Drugs is even worse, far, far worse than chocolate, right? Drugs, like cocaine, have an enormous, unbelievably huge spike that is incredibly, incredibly short, met by a huge drop in dopamine afterwards. This is what drives things like addiction. So, what does this mean? How can you fix this, right? Because what's always really happening when you do something pleasurable is your brain just starts to crave weird things that it naturally wouldn't be craving, like scrolling on YouTube, like drugs. Your brain is not designed to crave those things because they create weird dopamine patterns that your brain craves them tremendously, right? I've done a video on this before, and if you've seen that video, you probably already know what I'm going to say. The secret to this is a dopamine detox, an absolute detox, right? What this means is cutting out most of, if not all, sources of major dopamine spikes, right? So that means cutting out junk food. That means cutting out social media and scrolling. That means if you do drugs, it means cutting out drugs. If you drink, it means cutting out drinking. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But when you do this for a period of time, your dopamine receptors begin to undo the damage that's been done to them. And it allows your brain to go to its normal, original, healthy patterns of small little dips in dopamine, which creates motivation and drive, to a small spike, it's a reward, back to baseline. This is all very, very powerful. And I know it's going to be really, it sounds kind of boring. Like what? You want me to cut out everything, right? Yes. Something that's very interesting that I've noticed is that in many religions, there's periods of fasting, like in Christianity and Catholicism, there is Lent. Now, I'm aware that not all denominations practice Lent, but most do. And Lent is a period of time, I believe it's over 40 days of fasting from a specific thing, a specific vice, like giving up something for Lent. This is literally a dopamine detox. I believe in Islam and Judaism, there's other sometimes even more strict fasts. And these things are incredibly, incredibly powerful because they literally reset your dopamine. It's very interesting that people who practice religion, they already knew this. They already figured this out. God already gave you the blueprint of what to do. You just had to follow it. That's all I got for today. God bless you, and stay wild.